Velvet alibi. Paper tells the truth when it thinks no one is listening. It buckles where it was wept on, frays where it was held too tight, keeps a salt and iron memory of fingers that turned it in the dark. Leather remembers heat. Glue remembers pressure. A book says more with the way it falls open than with any sentence it contains. My work is to hear those confessions and put the spine back where a story can carry itself again. I'm Noah. I restore books and bindings in a studio above a cobbler's shop where mornings smell like wax and stitched leather. I keep my table the way other men keep altars. Bone folders lined like surgical instruments, glues cooling in their little water bath, linen threads spooled like promises. If you came by, you'd hear the soft animal sounds of paper being persuaded, sighs, not tears. You'd see me with my glasses on the end of my nose, tongue between my teeth when I'm coaxing a brittle hinge to remember how it once trusted a spine. Arya says I make patience erotic. She's a dancer who teaches strangers how to find a new angle for their body inside their old life. We built us with grown-up carpentry, joints that hold because we sanded them smooth, not because we pretended they'd never take weight. We wrote 2 rules on the inside of the kitchen cabinet where the coffee lives. Say the wanting before it happens. Never bring anyone else's perfume to our pillow. We don't perform modernity. We practice it with the same stubborn repetition that makes ankles strong. The day Livia Marceau walked into my studio, spring was inventing itself outside the open window, a bright insistence on beginnings. The bell above the door lifted its head. She came in with a box the color of theater curtains and a look that made space behave. She wore a cream silk dress that friendly light loved, and her mouth had the intelligence of someone who could answer questions she hadn't heard yet. If I'm precise, her perfume was iris with a cedar base and something clean, like a bar of soap from a childhood kitchen. "Mr. Hart?" she asked, glancing past me at the long table as though it were a stage. "I'm told you return history to itself." "I try," I said. "Some histories don't want to come back. I give them a soft chair and a chance to change their mind." Her smile unfurled in the careful way trust does when it knows it's being observed. "I'm Livia. My husband is Damien Marceau." You've heard that name in sentences with words like acquired, launched, dominates. His photograph is the expression a city wears when it's planning to raise the rent. Livia set the box down and lifted out a book wrapped in a shawl of old tissue. "It's my grandmother's commonplace book," she said. "Quotes, recipes, botanical drawings. It's falling apart. My grandmother used it to collect the world she liked more than the one she was given." She loosened the tissue and laid the book in my hands, and the room changed temperature. The leather was foxed and soft as a bruise. The boards had warped away from the text block like 2 halves of an argument. The foredge had green smudges of oxidized copper leaf. The marbled end papers had been loved to thinness. It was exquisite, the way an old deviation can be, something that made a different choice than everyone else and kept walking. "I can bind it discreetly," I said, opening at the back to test what the paper remembered. "Sew a new spine under the old leather. Wash and decidify the worst sheets. Line the torn ones with Japanese tissue. I'll leave the stains that are honest." She watched my hands without apology. "Leave the stains that are honest," she repeated. "Do you say that to all your patrons?" "I say it to anyone who wants me to lie with a brush," I said. "You hired the wrong restorer if you want the past scrubbed until it agrees." Livia looked at the window as if her reflection might answer for her. "What if some of the stains belong to now?" "Then we call them what they are," I said gently, "and decide together how to carry them." She leaned in, not quite close enough for secrecy. "There are pages in the back that aren't my grandmother," she murmured. "They're mine. I hid them under a paste-down before I married. I thought, no one looks behind a cover, but he's commissioning a glass display case for the entry hall. He likes things to pose. If he asks to see, I'd prefer not to be undone in the foyer like a museum puzzle. What did you hide? I asked. Truth I wrote when I wasn't afraid of being improved, Livia said. And one photograph I am not prepared to perform for an audience. I nodded. We'll lift the paste down together, I said. Consent matters even to paper. Her mouth did a thing I recognized from dancers on stage when someone had finally spoken to the choreography inside their bones. Will it hurt? She asked, fingers on the leather like a blessing. A little, I said, but we'll be kind. I took photos for the record and set the book on the warm sand tray to loosen the old glue. Livia didn't pretend she had urgent errands. She stood with me and breathed the glue's almond sweetness and watched me slide a lifting knife under the edge of the end paper. The thing about glue is it remembers being a liquid. My blade moved slowly, a man asking a locked room to tell him how it prefers to be opened. The end paper sighed as it let go. Livia's exhale matched it. Tucked between board and paper were 4 sheets of thinner stock folded like a secret, and pressed behind them, a small silver gelatin print the size of my palm. I recognized the old hunger of film for skin. Whoever took it understood how to steal light and make your body confess. Livia reached for the packet, but I stopped her gently. Gloves, I said, and she nodded like a student who plans to get away with brilliance anyway. We sat hip to hip on the stools. I slid the photograph into a mylar sleeve with a tenderness I have never afforded an invoice. The image was not explicit, it was worse. It was the kind of intimacy more dangerous than nudity. A mouth almost touching a collarbone, a hand half in, half out of a shirt, a lamp making the room a yes. The woman was Livia. The man was not her husband. She looked at me, and the question in her eyes was not, "Are you judging me?" It was, "Will you keep me intact?" There are ways to blind a display, I said quietly. We can seat this in a private sleeve under the board and line it with book cloth that looks original. You'll know it's there. No one else will unless you invite them to be clever. Can you write me that invitation? She asked, and I heard more layers of meaning than the paper held. I told Arya that night. We ate after her class, shoulders touching, the cat pressed against my shin like a warm punctuation mark. Before, I said, and said Livia's name slowly, letting it mean shape, situation, not trophy. Arya listened the way people do when they're confident they can endure the truth. Do you want her? She asked. She doesn't ask to police. She asks so I don't have to be alone with a weather system. I want the version of her that wrote pages, hid them, and still wants the book restored, I said. I want to be the man whose hands can hold that kind of wanting without taking it hostage. Arya reached for our rule taped inside the cabinet and tapped it with her finger. First words, she said, then mouths, keep our bed ours. Livia came every afternoon for a week while I washed pages and mended tears, and built a new spine from linen and quiet faith. She learned to damp a thin brush and lay paste with the arrogance of a woman who had previously been allowed to make mistakes in public. We leaned over the same sheet and breathed the same breath. I showed her the way a bone folder tames a wrinkle without shamming the paper. She showed me how a person can stand very still and still be a moving object. We talked about nothing dangerous. Her grandmother's garden, the way Damask knows it's better than you, the theater of donors. And then, in the little silences, our knees would bump, and we would discover how little we wanted to fix that. On the 3rd day, she brushed my wrist with 2 fingers, the way you test whether an electric fence is really live. It wasn't an accident. I watched my own hand in that moment like a character who might do something clumsy. I pulled softly away and set the brush down. Say it, Livia murmured. I want to kiss you, I said. I want to do it here where glue smells like marzipan and the window forgets we're in a city, but I'm not going to make your book complicit. She smiled straight into me. You speak like someone raised with lint rollers for conscience, she said. Thank you for saying it before you took it. Tonight, I said, because bravery likes appointments. I texted Arya from the stairwell. Before. I'm going to kiss a woman who brought me a bleeding thing and asked me to keep it from dying. The dots appeared and disappeared. Come home with clean hands. Don't shrink to fit anyone else's story. If you bring back tender, I'll cook it. I met Livia in a hotel lobby with a lobby's memory of everyone who'd ever pretended their exit was unremarkable. We didn't pretend. In the elevator, we kept space between our bodies and then failed with a small laugh. Inside the room, we were careful with the lights. We were careful with everything. I won't make a map of her. I will say we took turns being the person who asked and the person who answered. And when I put my mouth to the inside of her wrist, where the pulse writes telegrams, I could taste an entire grammar I had not known I could speak. After, we lay under a bedspread that had seen the city explain itself to other strangers, and we did not promise anything complicated. She told me Damien liked to own nouns. He believed that if he named a woman wife or a charity his, they would behave. She told me she had never been more herself than when she was hiding in plain sight. I told her paper says what it wants and leather only pretends to care who bought it. We kept it small and exact. 2 meetings in that room, 1 kiss in my studio when the light was so good even guilt bowed its head and pretended to be a legitimate part of the furniture. Each time I told Arya first, and each time she laid her cheek on my shoulder at night and said, "You smell like paste and a decision." On the 7th day, the doorbell rang and the room braced. Damien Marceau came in with his suit like a verdict and his watch like a flag. He shook my hand with an energy that suggested generosity and felt like leverage. "My wife says you're a magician," he said, looking past me to the table. "I approve of men who make things presentable." "I make them honest," I said, "because I can't help myself." He laughed like a person who practices sincerity in the mirror. "Honesty is very presentable these days," he said. "We'll want the book for the gala. Livia's grandmother is going to help us raise 60 million, and I'd prefer her spine not to creak when the cameras lean in." "I'll deliver it," I said. When he left, Livia stood very still, her hands on the table as if it were the only object not attempting to recruit her. "He hired a framer," she said quietly. "He wants the photograph. He doesn't know it exists. He just knows that display cases are powerful when you want to make a room kneel." "We can outwit the room," I said, opening the drawer where the mylar sleeve slept. "But we don't show this to a man who thinks glass is an argument." She stepped beside me and pressed her shoulder to mine as if boarding a ship. "No," she said, "we'll write our own caption." I built the secret sleeve into the board with cloth that matched the original, invisible to anyone but a person who knew where to slide a nail and pry. I lined the cavity with a soft rag paper so the photograph would not abrade. I left a mark only the 2 of us understood, a millimeter of undercut in the board's edge that the pad of a thumb could feel if it were seeking permission. At the gala, the book sat under lights and behaved like history in a dress. Livia wore black with a back that proposed and denied. She looked at me once across a room in love with itself, and her mouth made a shape I have thought about during storms. Damien paraded his money like policy. People took photos of the book and said they could smell its dignity. No one knew where its lungs were hiding. When the room emptied at last, I walked out into night that had washed its face properly. Livia found me by the corner where the bakery lets yeast do its preaching after midnight. I'm leaving him, she said, not triumphant, not tragic. Not because you made me brave, because I remembered I've never been more myself than when my hands were dirty with paste. I didn't save you, I said, but I'm honored you practiced your exit near my table. She kissed me once quick, a punctuation mark at the end of a short, honest paragraph. You taught me how to carry my stains, she said. I won't forget. After Livia left, Damien called to hire me for other restorations. Ledgers, a first edition that wanted better climate control, a family Bible with margins more interesting than any printed verse. I said no with the careful refusal a tradesman learns when he wants to protect his good name from money that doesn't know where it's been. He sounded bewildered. Men like him often confuse access with belonging. I brought the book to Livia's new place, a walk-up with light that hadn't learned to pose yet. She set it on a table that hadn't decided to be an heirloom and smoothed the leather with her palm. The secret was where we had left it. She slid her thumb along the board and felt the undercut and smiled in a way that made the room decide it would keep her. I left the photograph, she said, not a question. Nouns don't own me either, not even the ones I like. We didn't kiss. Some endings are too good for repetition. At home, Arya and I made dinner past midnight like teenagers with better knives. I kissed her neck while the onions argued with the pan, and she told me about a student who learned to love her own shadow. We stood at the counter and ate with our fingers. Before, she said, touching my bottom lip. Always the before. Don't let after do the heavy lifting. I won't, I said, and meant it like a meniscus holding. The studio returned to itself. Paper, thread, the friendly gravity of necessary objects. When I close at night, I turn off the lamp in 3 stages, table, shelf, window, so the room can find its way to dark without embarrassment. I run a cloth over the bone folders and feel their cool obedience. I look at my own hands and remember to be proud of what they don't take. Books outlive us because they understand repair is not a form of shame. If you look closely at any spine, you'll see where something once cracked and was persuaded back into service with thread you don't notice until you need to. That's all I want to be in this city, the thread. Not the cover, not the title. The stitch that holds, visible only to the person who knows where to press her thumb and feel the right kind of yes.